With the summer about halfway through and the hot, humid days of August approaching, I decided that a road trip was in order. To escape the swampy heat of the mid-Atlantic summer, I planned to head north through Maryland, up into Pennsylvania, and then on to New York's Lake Erie coastline, before heading east into the Finger Lakes region and then returning back home. I planned to be gone for about 5 days, so with the touring cases packed and a roll-top dry bag full of camping supplies, I loaded up the old R65 and hit the road. Since the weather was really nice, I decided to do a quick lap of the National Mall, which is something of an open-air zoo to the locals. The variety of tourists can make for some very interesting people watching. After a bit of sightseeing, it was time to actually cover some ground, so I headed to the George Washington Parkway, which runs northwest along the Potomac out of DC, and then popped off onto some side roads. First, I headed over to a small town called Poolsville in Maryland, because I know that they have a little market on Saturday mornings. After a short coffee break there, I started heading north through Maryland and up towards Pennsylvania. Riding through this central part of Maryland is a really gentle experience. You have these slow rolling hills and sweeping turns that take you on a tour through the countryside. Close to DC, you pass a lot of equine-focused farms with these quaint little names like Poplar Hill or Moon Rising. Further from DC, you see more general agriculture, corn, soybeans, and the like. As I was about to cross into Pennsylvania, I realized that my speedometer had stopped working. Of course, this would happen right at the beginning of a road trip, so I decided to keep puttering on towards Gettysburg and then pull over there and have a look. I had hoped the issue might be something of a simple fix, like a wire that was just loose and needed tightening, but after pulling off the cover and having a look, nothing really made itself apparent. The speedo and the tack units on these bikes are not really easy to get apart, so any fix of a worm drive or some other banjaxed item would ultimately have to wait.
Into town, find some lunch.
I had originally hoped to stop to get lunch in Gettysburg, but the place was so full of visitors, it was a Saturday after all, and the one place I stopped at was so short on staff that they said it'd be a while, so I decided to head a bit up the road. A few towns up the road, I stopped at a little drive-in called Cameo, where I got a greasy patty melt, chatted with a few other folks riding through, and then got back on the road. Rural Pennsylvania is also a really agricultural heartland, with these small farms and barns and waving fields of corn and grain, providing an alternating pattern of scenery as you fly by. Over time, as you head north into the state, the terrain begins to change from farms and fields to a forest. And on the way through the forest, I passed a sign for the Mount Pisgah altar, so I nipped up the gravel road to the site. The altar was built in 1979 and 1980 on a hill overlooking the Susquehanna Valley, and people have weddings and religious services there. After poking around for a while, I got back on the bike and headed to my campsite. I was headed to the Bald Eagle State Forest for the night, and as I got nearer to my campsite, the roads got smaller and more gravelly, and the phone service dwindled from little to none. And by the time I got to my site, my phone didn't work anymore, and turning my bike off, peaceful silence reigned. In the morning, after packing everything up on the bike and going to start it up, I was met with a slightly unpleasant chirping sound from the front of the engine. So, as I idled the bike, the sound went away over time, and after a few minutes, when the bike was warm, it was completely gone. I'm not entirely sure what it was, but with no cell service, I really only had one method to get out of the forest, so I set off. The bike was running just fine, so I decided to head off the other direction out of the forest, because it did look a little shorter on my downloaded Google Maps copy. To my chagrin, that trail ended in a bridge that was completely out and was being replaced. So, after backtracking a bit, I headed down Patty Mountain Road. At first, it was a delightful little lane with grass in the middle and nice clean gravel on either side. And then it started to get a little rocky, and then a little rockier. And then it became a bit of a rock scramble, frankly, something that my poor R65 was definitely not cut out for. I didn't even get footage of the worst parts of it because my brain was so fully consumed with not dragging hard parts and busting my oil pan open in the middle of the woods. So, better judgment probably would have seen me turning around earlier, but, well, good judgment keeps you away from interesting situations, right?
I'm amazed if I still have all my stuff by the time I reach the fucking end of this.
I eventually picked my way out and got back to a decent gravel road. It was really a delight after having to pick lines through all those rocks on a street bike. After getting out of the forest, it was time to aim for New York, so I headed west out of Bald Eagle State Forest and towards the Susquehanna Forest in western Pennsylvania. Heading there took me through more small towns and fields before getting to the Susquehanna Forest, where the roads were surrounded by tall pines and rocky creeks running alongside the road. The gray skies and cool temperatures had me feeling even a little chilly as the trees sped by. After a few hours heading through the forest, I came up on Lake Erie. The sun had broken through the clouds and I felt the temperature rise a bit, and after all the time spent in the forest, it felt like something of coming into a promised land. Boat shops lined the roads, small ice cream stands did their summer sales to happy crowds, and jet skis skimmed across the glassy lake surface. I had planned to stop in the town of Chautauqua, home of the Chautauqua Institution. Naturally, anyone who has read Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance probably has an idea why I might want to stop there. But what I hadn't realized was the town is almost entirely pedestrian-focused, with no parking and a general dislike for auto traffic. So I respect that, so I headed up the road a bit and hung out at the lakeside further up the way before getting a coffee. After relaxing by the lake for a bit, it was time to head on to my campsite for the night in Evangola State Park. Route 5 runs along the coast of the lake and up to the park. It's lined with houses and many vineyards, row after row of grapes. Another constant feature on the roadside was firewood, as much as you can carry for $5. I got into the park that evening, set up my tent, had a bite to eat, and after chatting a bit with a couple who were on a road trip themselves on a Benelli and a Royal Enfield, then went down to the water to enjoy the sunset. The next morning, I headed off with my new friends to get some breakfast in the little town of Angola. We found ourselves an endearing little diner called Tom Tom's, and though their lights were partially out due to a power issue, we still had some good breakfast. I had to work for the day, so I set up to work.
I was gonna say, it's still like a little griddle sign. That seems promising.
I knew I was close to Niagara Falls, and I haven't been there since I was a kid, so on my lunch break, I headed up through Buffalo and then to the falls. After paying an exorbitant $5 for an hour of street parking, I headed down to see the falls themselves. After seeing the falls, I spent a little bit of time at a local Starbucks finishing up some work before heading back to my campsite and hanging out by the campfire with the other motorcyclists. That night, a storm blew through and it was a pretty windy morning as I packed up the tent and all my stuff onto my bike before heading off to the diner again with the other riders. After breakfast, my new friends headed off to finish up the rest of their road trip, and once I'd seen them off, I spent the rest of the morning doing a bit of work in a local juice place. Quite the little town. In the diner, a man told me that Kathy Hochul, the governor, was basically a fascist and the Bible said that we're living in the end times, and then right next door you have a new age woo-woo juice bar. Two Americas, side by side. On my lunch hour, I hit the road again to get a little closer to my stop for the night in Watkins Glen. About an hour of riding would take me from Angola over to Pike, New York, where I saw a little cafe on the map. The ride took me through the Cattaraugus Indian Territory, where gas was cheaper by about 80 cents, so I filled up my tank there and then set off east. Again, the rolling hills of western New York provided frame after frame of bucolic scenery, especially with a lot of dairies. It seems most of the farms in this part of the state were either dairy or cattle operations. Once I got to the little town of Pike, I stopped at a small cafe where I got a really good BLT and a few hours of work done. It was the kind of small-town local restaurant where everyone knows everybody else, making me something of an oddball. One particularly chatty gentleman told me all about the local drama in the town. Apparently, 2 cattle had gotten off the local farmer's property and were taken in by a woman who runs an animal shelter of sorts, and there was a standoff involving the state police. I later looked the story up, and he wasn't joking. There is a USA Today article about the incident. Apparently, the woman is actually facing criminal charges now. So, anyway, the same chatty local had told me that I shouldn't leave the area without stopping at the local state park, and he told me it was essentially the Grand Canyon of the East. That piqued my curiosity enough, and the park was pretty close, so after enjoying the roadside cafe for a few hours, it was back on the bike and over to Letchworth State Park. Despite its rather unpleasant name, the park is a beautiful set of ribbony roads that run 17 miles up a huge gorge that's 550 feet deep in some places, carved out by the Genesee River. The riding was spectacular through the park, and so were the views. The ride to Watkins Glen from there was only another hour and a half or so, through yet more serene pastoral scenes with little produce stands with honor cash boxes and little stacks of firewood offering up fuel for $5 an armload. I also rode by the Glenn H. Curtis Museum, which has a lot of vintage aircraft and motorcycles on display, but sadly it was closed for the evening when I came by. It was only a short ride from there to my motel in Watkins Glen for the night. When I got in, I decided I needed to go for a jog, so I set off around the town, a quaint little town up against the southern shore of Seneca Lake. The place has a racing pedigree. The first auto race after World War II was held here, and the boats bobbing gently on the water was a nice break from hearing the wind rush past me all day. In the morning, I knew I was going to be on the bike all day, so I headed over to the state park on the other side of town for another run to stretch the legs. Watkins Glen State Park is another long, sinewy park that runs through a gorge, but this one is spectacular in a different way than Letchworth is. The gorge walls are tall, creating an enclosed, contemplative space in the center, seemingly hidden away from the rest of the world. Cascading waterfalls and birdsong provides the soundtrack for the experience. I'm sure later in the day, screaming tourists probably also contribute to the soundtrack, but being here at 7 in the morning helps save me from that. After getting back and showered and on the bike, the plan was get home. About 300 miles separated myself in Watkins Glen from my home back in Virginia. I started the day off on a bit of slab, then remembered just how completely miserable that is, so I told Google to stop using the interstate and just enjoy the incredibly fun B roads through Pennsylvania. As I got back into the city and onto the last bit of highway, I had a definite sense of the trip ending, which was sad, but also I was looking forward to seeing my fiance and my cat. Although I was a bit bummed to be parking the bike for a bit, it was nice to know that I really only took 2 days of vacation for this trip and decided on it on a relatively last minute. So that freedom is always there, but it's nice to know that if life starts feeling claustrophobic again, you can pick a direction, pack the creaky old side cases, and hit the road.